Hey everybody, Gurmy's Coast Yard here, and in this episode of Germanator Studios, we are doing a handful of things, starting with putting the final finishing touches, I can't believe I have to say final finishing touches, on our launched roller coaster. And we are starting by putting a transfer track on just before the launch, where the ride can theoretically be transferred to a storage track. Now, this is just it's more of a scenery thing slash Easter egg, and this is not actually a functional transfer track within the game itself. But you can see here where I am. I used a roller coaster scenery glitch essentially to create a scenery track piece, and how you do that. If you go back to the beginning of this footage, you can see I basically created what we'll call a ghost piece using an S bend, and then before placing that piece, I exited the game and saved. And what that does is it turns that ghost piece into what is essentially a track scenery item. So when you reload the game, that track piece will be there, but it's not a functional track piece. The game registers it, it treats it just like a scenery item. And you can see right there, so while I was putting in that track, the game won't let you intersect anything with that scenery piece. So you have to delete it just like you would a scenery piece. And then so that way you can do track work to intersect it. And that's just if you want to adjust that track. Then save and exit and then reload the game once more. And then that track piece will be there intersecting the actual track of the ride. So if you need to go back and look at that footage, hopefully you can see how I did it. Relatively self-explanatory. But definitely something to be wary of, and never save and exit a game if you have a ghost track piece. If you've made this mistake, you probably know what I mean. So here you can see me working on the storage track area. You can see I had to extend it one block further than the facade we made in a previous episode, and that's just to make those stations big enough to hold trains. I like to use stations because if I decide later on when working on a park that I want to take a train off the ride, I will put one in one of those stations basically, just to make it feel more realistic, just for fun more than anything though. So, but you can see that four long train is long enough for those stations, which are 5 tiles long. And you'll see here in a moment how I extend this building. It's about what you would expect, but I wanted to continue that theme of having that sort of divot in the wall. So I inlaid the corner by one piece, and then you'll see, I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure I just left that corner as it is, yeah. So basically it's diagonal for a short bit, and then I placed another three wide section of windows on the other side. You can see me experimenting there, but I ended up deleting those. When we get to that service road that goes into the garage door in a future episode, that's when I'll figure out how I want to put something there. But I'll probably do the building around that when I complete the final exterior of the show building. And right here you can see me putting a door in place. Most of the time in major theme parks you wouldn't see a door like this that exits right onto the main midway, with like a staircase. You just wouldn't see stuff like that. And I put fences around it, so in theory peeps couldn't get up there. But that's something I may change later on. If once I complete that service road area, I'll probably be able to put a behind the scenes entrance to that storage track area, and then I will hopefully remember to get rid of that little staircase, because we don't want nosy guests poking around. And we know, if you've worked in an amusement park, you know it's inevitable that one day or another a guest will poke around somewhere that they shouldn't. Luckily, this is Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, so they're mostly confined to the pathways and the rides. And here you can just see me renaming the storage, and that's just for consistency's sake, but also when I look, if I am using the menu to look at roller coasters, I can see, oh, that ride's closed. Oh, that's the storage track for this ride. I don't need to worry about that. And here on the other side of that show building facade we created, I'm just placing a restroom, doing something with that building, and I figured at that point it's far enough back in the park that it's worth having an additional restroom. And you'll notice for those ceiling pieces, I placed them a 2/3 height above the restroom, and that's because I am surrounding that restroom from the interior. If I want to be able to click on it and zoom in, you have to have ceilings at least 1 2/3 tile heights above the ground beneath them to be able to zoom in for far enough to see what's beneath them. Now, moving on from that, this is the second to last thing we do, I believe, unless I'm forgetting some major thing. But we are finishing off the flower beds in this area of this section of the park. So you can see I sort of widened the path along there, and that was to make the 2 flower beds on either side of our discus ride symmetrical. And even though it makes the path a little wonky, I figured the symmetry will look better in the long run. It'll make it easier for me to design something where I could design it on one side and then copy that design on the other side. Not copy and paste like we were doing in the last episode, but just follow the same design. And not only are these technically symmetrical, but they're just the same shape in general, so it made it even easier when coming up with a design. And I decided to follow suit with the rest of the design of the museum building and go with flower beds and rose bushes. I didn't do any topiaries, but I thought in the end it looked fine. And you can see I sort of toyed with things here. It started off being very rectangular, but you'll see soon enough I removed the corner pieces from the rose bushes, and that just helps round things off where we can and helps it make a little more natural. You've probably heard a saying or something along the lines of there are no straight lines in nature, or there are no right angles in nature. And especially when you're doing landscaping in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 or any amusement park game, if you can avoid right angles, it generally helps a lot. As with anything, there's a time and a place for everything. But when you want something to look natural and not draw too much attention to itself, avoiding right angles can help. And you can see I'm just finishing off these flower beds here. I may adjust that pathway because I don't really like having the 2 center planters right next to each other. And I say that in the sense that in every other part of the paths, those planters are just in the center and the path goes on either side. So I may do something special there. We'll decide later on. Now, in the last episode, you may remember I placed a concert piece near the entrance, the karaoke concert, and deleted it to figure out where a service road would go. Well, I figure if we're going to finish off this section of the park, I might as well build a concert hall just for fun. So you can see I'm using path pieces to create faux bleachers, we'll say. Not that these are functioning bleachers, but they are accessible to guests. I made sure of that. And if guests are standing there, granted, the guests won't know they're in the concert because that's just how the game logic works. But they will theoretically be able to have a view of the concert and a rather decent view of that. And then guests who go through the actual entrance will be able to access the pit area. So this is a bit of a slow start at first, but what I'm doing right now is just actually the first main thing I do here is start placing rafters. And another reason I wanted to do this is because enclosing a flat ride or a concert or any of these other attractions that aren't roller coasters with a show building, or I should say just with a building in general, is slightly different from building a show building in that you don't exactly get to choose the perimeter. And what I mean by that is the interior edge of any attraction, as far as I know, you can't place any wall pieces along those, not even with the M. Brooks cheat. So you have to work around that. And you'll see how I do that here in a minute when I start placing walls. But just to start, I found the minimum height I could place a girder piece over top of the concert, and then I set that as the height for all of them. And you'll see me doing some weird things with the building shaping here. I don't just build a brick. it, I do a little more than that, and you'll see why. You can see already I've left a space for a garage door. And on the subject of building on like the interior versus exterior edges, you can see it on the back side of there. I ended up going an entire tile length out from the concert attraction piece, and placing those on the interior edges, and that was just to make sure the corners are smooth. If you have a corner where you place both walls on an exterior piece, it'll create sort of a divot in the corner, and I just find that it doesn't look great, and I try to avoid that when and where I can. And there you can just see me putting a couple doors in, pretty straightforward. And I'm just doing a little more along here to finish off the walls. Not a whole lot to it. One thing I will note, and one thing I try to consider when I design attractions, you'll see right now I'm enclosing a ramp to the bleachers, and on the other side there's a staircase. And when I have anything like this, I usually try to include, like whether it's to a ride or whatnot, I try to include at least one ramp. So in theory, now there are no wheelchair or guests with quote-unquote disabilities in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. But I try to consider accessibility just because it's realistic, and that's what I'm trying to do, is design things realistically. So I'll try to put a ramp in when and where I can, and if it's in a ride area, I would do a ramp either up the exit or the entrance, but I just make sure that there's at least one access point to the platform that doesn't include any stairs. Definitely not mandatory in your parks, but if you're going for complete realism, it's definitely a consideration that's important to make. So I guess I've built a lot in my little ramble there. On the opposite side from where the garage door is, you saw a little smaller area that comes off to the side, right next to the stage, and I figured that could be sort of like the dressing room area for performers. And I do a little more additions, we'll say, to the building later on, but for now we're working on the facade. Now I ended up going with the Ellie wall pieces. I've gone like 2 episodes not knowing what these were called. I think they're Ellie or Eli. Nevertheless, I ended up going with those for having a big window along the front of the building. I was just going to leave it as like a flat wall with no windows, but I thought the windows would look nicer. This is loosely inspired, and I'm an Ohioan, so a lot of stuff is inspired by parks I've been to in Ohio or just other places I've been. And this is loosely inspired by, I guess it's sort of a coliseum in Marysville, Ohio, at their fairgrounds. Not Marysville. I can't think of it. It is. I'm going to look it up on my phone as I talk to you, unless I cannot think of it. Anyhow, you can see that building. Okay, so along the left there and to the back, I placed more of those windows, and I figured that could be like an office space for the building managers, because running a venue, like a concert venue, it's sort of its own operation. Now, granted, in an amusement park, there's a lot of departments operating a lot of things, but I figured for simplicity's sake, and just for no real reason in particular, I just figured having some office space there works, and it's a good consideration. Also, I figured it out. This is loosely based off of the Coliseum building, we'll say, at the Marion, Ohio Fairgrounds. Not that any of you really care, but I wanted to make sure I figured that out. And here you can see me enclosing the queue and the exit. It's a very short queue, and queues don't need to be long at all in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. But in this case, especially for the karaoke concert, it never draws a lot of guests. So you see me enclosing that. This little platform here, you see me putting the railings around. I figured that could be where like the people stand with spotlights. Pretty straightforward. And now you see me placing the paths along the entrance. And this is all straightforward stuff. So forgive me if you don't want to hear me saying what you couldn't see on the screen, even though I've kind of been doing that the whole episode. Anyway, here I'm placing banner signs along the side of the building. I may take a couple of those out, but I sort of placed them everywhere I thought they could work to start. And eventually I will put actual text on those. But here you can see me putting a couple benches in, just the general path stuff. Benches, lights, and trash cans. And it's always good to stay on top of those things because it's easier to do them as you go than to do them all at once when you're building a Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 park. But when and how you do that is for you to decide. And right there I just put a little fence so guests wouldn't be able to get behind the scenes. Fence on both sides. And you'll see in a moment. Well, first of all, we're going to type karaoke on the sign so the guests know who's performing. They can get excited. I hear she's a really big hit in the Rollercoaster Tycoon world. And putting the air conditioners on top so the guests don't dissolve in their own sweat in there. And in a moment, maybe. Yeah, I know it's in a moment from now. I put some cars back in this little area. Now I used a preset scenery item like we did with the copy and paste. In a previous park, I had designed a parking lot, and I think I saved a line of like 8 to 10 cars. And just so that way they're already different colors and different shapes and different orientations, and I don't have to do that all at once. I like to use that pre-saved piece. And then I deleted the ones that ended up inside the building. And here on the other side, you can see me placing Kara's tour bus. Oh, we're done. Oh no. I'm going to extend this little ending thing here so I can finish talking. But you saw me placing the tour bus and changing the colors. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, enjoy the music. We're done. Bye. Have a great day.